listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a diversified media enterprises production. I'm Doug Cunningham. The New Jersey AFL-CIO says the election of Phil Murphy as governor and Sheila Oliver as lieutenant governor speaks to the unmatched mobilization efforts of organized labor and the New Jersey AFL-CIO's political program that is unparalleled by any other in our state or nation. AFL-CIO in New Jersey says that effort included thousands of union volunteers, national, state, and local affiliates, central labor councils, and building trades councils. Phone banks were activated and thousands of mail pieces delivered statewide. In addition to the governor and lieutenant governor, labor in New Jersey also expanded pro-labor majorities in the state legislature. 43 rank-and-file union members running for public office won their elections. New Jersey's AFL-CIO says working people needed a victory and organized labor delivered. Republicans in the Wisconsin State Senate have made it the 28th state to call for a new U.S. constitutional convention. It takes 34 states to actually call a convention to rewrite America's Constitution. The resolution 28 states have now passed says that the purpose of the Constitutional Convention shall be, quote, for the limited purpose of requiring the federal government to operate under a balanced budget. But once the Constitutional Convention Pandora's box is open, it could well turn into a runaway convention where other constitutional rewrites could happen. And since it's driven by state legislatures controlled by Republicans, America could wake up one day to a new U.S. Constitution written essentially by Republicans. Just 14 states had legislatures totally controlled by Republicans in 2009. In 2017, there are 33 such states. In 2010, the GOP was able to gerrymander congressional districts, cementing the Republican state-level political power and protecting its congressional seats. The constitutionality of that gerrymandering is being decided in a case from Wisconsin currently before the U.S. Supreme Court. The Pension Benefits Guaranty Corporation, PBGC, has reached a new agreement with Sears that will put $500 million into two Sears pension plans that have approximately 100,000 people in them. The deal frees the struggling Sears from having to protect subsidiaries holding real estate and intellectual property for the benefit of those pension plans. The deal is expected to take a few months to close, and when it does, Sears will be free to sell off more of its assets. Sears has been losing billions of dollars in recent years. WIN is America's multimedia news voice for workers.
We need to make more money. You know, what they're paying us, a greedy corporation, they just want to pay us what they want to pay us. And it's not right.
We are sick of an economy and a democracy that are rigged against us.
Support WIN's worker news mission at workersindependentnews.com. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit workersindependentnews.com.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here tonight on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Alabama. Say it with me, Alabama. Is it unusual in Alabama for a 32-year-old man to go hitting on a 14-year-old girl. Well, maybe not in the 1970s. It was not unusual. Today, I'm hoping Alabama, that you look at this and say no. And we're going to get to the Roy Moore story tonight. Bombshell. Honestly, truthfully, if it's true, even Mitch McConnell is saying, yeah, you should probably, this could be bad for us. Even with the you-know-what grabber in the White House, this is, I think, one of those things that even the insane Republican conservative would look at, I hope, with a jaundiced eye and go, bit too far, just a bit too far. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out and where the more, and again, it goes to the question, where's Roy Moore been? Doesn't want to debate, doesn't talk to the media, doesn't answer any questions at press conferences. He's basically nowhere. He's pulling a Republican version of Martha Coakley. And there's a really good shot that Doug Jones, a guy who took on the KKK, could be a senator from Alabama, and what a message that would send. Just amazing stuff. And the reality is, crazy religious zealot, kind of gotta wonder why. One of those things that I keep going back to whenever I meet someone who they feel the need to proselytize, they feel the need to share their love of Jesus. And look, I view myself as a Christian as well, just not somebody who's going to bludgeon you with my beliefs on religion. Generally, I find those people, the folks who are the rigid, inflexible kind of, we're going to beat you senseless with the book, they've got an interesting past. Alcoholism, sex addiction, wife beaters, drug addicts. You go down the list of all of the things that people seem to trade religion for or trade from religion. So we're going to get to that. Lots on that. Also, the big news coming out of the Senate. Is this a moment where the Senate Republicans are going, we took the bloodbath, we took the beating on Tuesday, we got kind of something of a message, so we have to make it look like, well, we're trying? Or is this a full turning of their back on the White House? Now, what's interesting is the Senate plan, not an awful lot different in my view than the House plan, other than it does expand the zero individual tax bracket. It maintains the lowest 10% rate. Seven brackets instead of 3. Top rate, 38.5% for the highest of earners. Still does increase the individual deduction from 12 up to 12 and 24 for married couples. Does some of that. Does the child tax credit expansion. And again, that's just a credit. Doesn't mean that, woohoo, we're getting a whole bunch of money. Not happening. But what it also does do with that is it lifts the existing caps. Now, there are some of us who go, we want to target certain monies to help working class people. I don't necessarily think Donald Trump needs an additional $1,600 for Barron. I just don't. But if the Senate plan goes through, he'd get an extra $1,650 tax credit for having Barron. And you go, okay, we can have a discussion around that. I don't think he needs it. What I would rather you do, take that $1,600 and give it in the fund of additional earned income tax credit money. Or, hey, how about not making it a tax credit? How about making it an actual amount of money that every person with children in a middle class, in a certain income range, anyone from, $150,000 down gets $1,000 per kid, or $1,650 per kid. You want to help the economy? Give parents more money so that they can buy sugar and shoes and send kids to camps and do all that stuff. That's how we help an economy. Also does some other things, keeps the adoption tax credit, which should make the anti-abortion people happy. The charitable contributions still there in force. The deduction for mortgages, they're going to keep at $1 million. They're going to preserve the medical expense deduction, which the House wanted to rip out. They are going to repeal the alternative minimum tax so that the Donald will be able to reap the wonderful rewards of not having to pay that. Also permanently lowers the corporate tax rate from 35 down to 20, but puts it off for another year. So, hey, got something there. And also it allows, as the House bill does, to deduct all of new equipment. And that's one that, I got to be honest. I look at the business climate where we are right now, and businesses, according to Donald Trump, are doing wildly well. Never more profitable. Hoarding billions of dollars offshore. Never better. Hoarding trillions of dollars. Actually, trillions of dollars. Trillions. And what we're saying is, we're going to give you more because you needed to expand. And I go, wait a second, it's nuts. It's literally nuts to think about, given what we're being told, that businesses are doing better than ever. The business climate's better than it's ever been. And yet we're going to give them more resources to not create jobs. Because look, there's no guarantees in this. There are no guarantees that says, if we give you more, as we've done for, 50, 60 years, that they're going to actually use it to create any jobs. I mean, this is the most inefficient way to distribute wealth in this country, in my view. If you want an economy to heat up, you got to give consumers the revenue to be able to. Even as someone as extreme economically as Milton Friedman understood that. Uncle Milty got it. Give people money, they'll spend it, which is why he came up with the negative tax, which is really a guaranteed minimum income of, everybody gets like $6,000 a year back. This was back in the 70s. Everyone gets $6,000 a year. So a family of four gets $24,000 cash from the government. Here, take it, spend it, go, spend, shop, and enjoy your shopping. Because he understood that you give those people money, you give us, we the consuming class, we the working class, we the people who need sugar and shoes and roofs and cars and clothes for the kids and shoes, and you go on down the line. X boxes and Y boxes and K boxes and all down the list. We'll buy the stuff. We'll buy. We're great at that. We're Americans, damn it. It's what we do. Because he understood that by giving we the working class money, we'll spend it, and then it goes up. My uncle, who's a very wealthy guy, says, look, at the end of the day, I'm going to end up with the money anyway. Give people tax breaks. It's going to come back to me in one way or another. Because you're going to still need things. But what we've done, and this is the amazing part of it, this is where business in this country has really lost their minds, because it's no longer about business. It's simply about money and power. It's simply about how much they can hoard from the rest of us. If it were really about business, businesses would be clamoring for customers. It's not about that. They don't want to provide the service anymore. They don't want to build the widget anymore. They don't want to deal. They just want the money. So if they can get the government to go, here, take all the money, so much better for them. They don't have to deal with us, the middle people. They don't have to fleece it out of us. They're just going to take it. So am I shocked that this tax plan is what they continue to push? Not even a little bit. And the reality is you and I, we have to be the ones that wake up and stop with this myth believing that, and I still can't believe we fell for it. Tax cuts creates jobs, Rick. Agreed. Again, depends on who gets the tax cuts. As a guy I had on the show a couple of years ago said, look, he was a business owner, multimillionaire guy. He said, look, you give me a tax cut, I'm going to go on vacation. That simple. I'm not going to hire anybody. I don't have any reason to hire anybody. You bring 20 customers in my door because they've got the money. Well, I got to hire people because I want their money. That's common sense. That's really common sense. But it's no longer how business works here. It's really not. And what we've done is really remarkable as a country. We've gone from people who used to be able to critically think and understand that to a generation, and I guess my generation was the first that really was sold it in large vat-sized Kool-Aid jars. That, you know, tax breaks are good for businesses because there's a trickle-down effect. And we bought it. I remember the 80s. You know, well, we didn't all buy it because I go back to George H.W. Bush, who said that the Reagan plan, supply side voodoo Reaganomics was the line that he used. He got it. The rest of us, we're the ones who drank the Kool-Aid. We're the ones who believe that magic fairy dust is possible. We're the ones who believed that that we could cut taxes, cut revenue into our coffers, and somehow through magic, through, I don't know, pixie dust or magic boxes or, you know, three-way mirrors, I don't know, maybe it would be more money. And it's just, well, dumb. But we bought it, didn't we? Hook, line, sinker. And look, the first year of the Reagan tax cuts, it did bring in modestly a little bit more money. But we kept going back and giving loopholes, and the rich people were going, hey, we want more and more and more, and this insatiable appetite for more. You know, I go back to the top marginal tax rate. Under Dwight David Eisenhower, good socialist president, 92% top marginal tax rate. If you made $1.6 million in today's dollars back then, 92% was the top rate. So that dollar over 1.6 million, you paid 92% on. Kennedy came along and said, no, we're going to, and again, this is the Chicago school folks. These are the really smart people who go, hey, we can take that money and we can, because we're smarter. We're smart. We can do stuff with it. He dropped it down to 70%. Same argument. We're going to cut loopholes because nobody paid the 92%. The effective rate, I think, was somewhere in the 60s. Still really, really high, enough to pay for roads, a massive infrastructure plan. If you remember Eisenhower building the interstate highway system, we paid for wars, we paid for colleges, we paid for lots of stuff because we had the revenue to do it. Kennedy came in and said, no, we're going to drop that down to 70. And that stood for a while, and then Reagan came along, and Reagan took it from 70 all the way down to 28, which caused a massive recession and caused just insane amounts of debt. Just insane amounts. I mean, it's crazy. Really, honestly, and truthfully, just crazy. And then that brought us to read my lips, you know, and up came Bush raising taxes because he saw all the red ink. And we're back in those moments again. We're back in these moments again. And it's crazy to me. It's insane to me that we're still buying it. It's just absolutely crazy and nuts. Washington's crazy. I mean, just nuts. And it's one of those things And we turn to Alexandra Thornton at the Center for American Progress. Alexandra, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, my pleasure.
So I look at this tax bill that we're seeing come out of the Senate. We're seeing the differences between the House and the Senate. How different are they? How similar are they?
Well, they're pretty similar. They're actually the same kind of framework. They have a few tweaks that are sort of window dressing to try to address the claims about the middle class having to pay more and small businesses not getting a tax break. But the bottom line is they're only tweaks. And the reality is that it's still a budget buster and it's still huge tax cuts for the wealthy and corporations. Pretty much all the different tax cuts for the wealthy and corporations are still there.
Yeah, but what we keep hearing is that this is going to be a boom for the middle class, that this is $4,000 for the average middle class. In fact, I've had some people tell me it's going to be $2,000 for each child. It's almost like a lottery winning, if you will.
That is just simply not true. The $4,000 figure you mentioned came from a statement that was made by President Trump's top economic advisor, but he basically was using data that was that he grossly exaggerated. In fact, the Harvard economist whose data he used actually came out the very next day and said, "This is completely exaggerated. My modeling doesn't show this."
Right.
So and basically, the thing that people have to remember is that this not only doesn't really help the middle class much at all and takes away many of the tax provisions like the medical expense deduction when people have high medical expenses because maybe they have a cancer diagnosis or they have a goes into a nursing home. They take that away in the House bill. It's not taken away in the Senate bill, but there has to be a conference, so it's not safe yet. And then there are a bunch of other provisions they take away, like all the personal independence exemptions are taken away. So basically, it's still not that great for the middle class. And meanwhile, there's huge tax cuts for the wealthy and corporations, which will cause a big hole in the deficit. They've allowed themselves $1.5 trillion deficit finance tax cuts over 10 years, and that's going to have to be paid for. And everybody knows it. And Republicans have made it clear that in their budgets that they propose that they want to cut Medicare and Medicaid to the tune of $1.5 trillion, and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, where were these Republicans 8 years ago when we needed a massive stimulus? One of the things I've been saying is, look, it seems like the last 8 years under President Obama, something happened to the Republican Party when Donald Trump became president. Because I remember austerity, I remember sequester, I remember all of this to the brink of the abyss with the budgets. Because hey, we can't raise the deficits. We can't have more debt. It's all about the children. And now it's like drunken sailor time.
Oh yeah. No, there's incredible hypocrisy right now. No doubt about it. Republicans who just cried about the huge deficit years ago are now happy to blow a hole in the deficit further for tax cuts for the wealthy and corporations. But I also that raises another point that I think is really important to note is that we're really not in a situation where tax cuts make sense. I mean, corporations have had huge. They have historic after-tax profits right now. They're awash in cash. If they really needed to, if they really wanted them to invest more and pay their workers more, they would be doing it already because they're awash in cash, but they're not doing it. So it's hard to understand why giving them a huge tax break, and this would be a huge tax break, would cause them to invest any more.
Yeah, you make a good point because look, according to the president, corporate profits have never been better. It's fabulous, and in fact, borrowing rates are still historically low. So if businesses thought it was time to invest and to expand, they would already have done it. These tax breaks, these handouts are not going to spur any of that development. All it's going to do, in my view, and you can agree or disagree, is line the pockets of shareholders, CEOs, and the very well-to-do at the expense of infrastructure, education, healthcare. You go on down the line.
That's a great point because with this hole in the deficit that we would have, we wouldn't be able to afford to do infrastructure when infrastructure is the very thing we ought to be doing right now. The corporate tax burden, even though that headline rate is high at 35%, the reality is that their actual tax burden is low because there's so many loopholes in the corporate tax code. If we just lowered the rate, if we just got rid of those loopholes and use the revenue to lower the corporate rate as much as we could using that revenue, we would be in a position where we could still do infrastructure. And we could create jobs that way, and it would be really good for our economy for the long term.
Yeah, how about we do this? How about we go back to the Tax Reform Bill of '86, take all those loopholes that have been put in place since then, because we were told we've seen this movie before. Lower the rates, we'll do away with some loopholes, and the very next day, the loopholes start coming back. How about we undo all those loopholes, pay for our infrastructure, invest in the future of this country, because if you want to do business in this country, it's kind of important to have roads and bridges and rail and air and sea and all of that stuff if you want to get your product to market. How about that?
I absolutely agree, and I would add to that list well-educated workers. In in these tax bills they're proposing right now, they're taking away a lot of education benefits. They're claiming that they're simplifying them, but their form of simplification is simply to take things away.
Yeah.
So, for example, the House bill takes away the lifetime learning credit, but it doesn't replace the ability to have a tax benefit for when a worker, say, is trying to get retraining to get a new job.
You know, how short-sighted is that? And I'm glad you brought that up, because we're moving into an era of, if you believe the studies and you believe the study that came out a couple years ago, that half of the jobs in the next 20 years that we do today will be gone, that workers are going to have lifelong continuing education to upgrade and to change their skills. How short-sighted is it to do away with that kind of an investment in people who want to be able to invest in themselves and upgrade their skills?
Yeah, it's incredibly short-sighted, and it's especially short-sighted in the sense that we have such wealth inequality right now. It's really a situation today where only the wealthy can afford to get a good education. And we should be turning around, and we should be having the wealthy and corporations that are doing super well right now pay their fair share of taxes so that we can afford to train workers and help people of all income levels have the opportunity to get a really good education and contribute to the economy.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, Alexandra. One of the things that's been really frustrating for me in this whole discussion is this argument that we're having between static scoring and dynamic scoring, because while the right keeps telling me that if we give all of the money to the very wealthy, they're the smart people, they know what to do with the money, and then something will trickle down, something will come down on the rest of us, and we'll all be better off. We've heard this now for got to be 40 years, most of my lifetime. It hasn't happened. It hasn't worked. When do we say, no, this isn't going to work? It didn't work then. It's not going to work now.
Well, I think that people should say that, and they should call their senators and congressmen and tell them we don't want to take that approach. It's, the polling shows that people get it. They understand. They know that those tax cuts historically during the Bush years, for example, didn't pan out. There's also the example of Kansas, where they did, Governor Brownback passed huge tax cuts in 2012, and it just tanked their budget. They ended up having to cut, funding for schools and all kinds of things. They used up all their cash reserves, and they eventually repealed it, in fact, earlier this year. So, yeah, tax cuts don't create jobs. The money never trickles down. And in a time of wealth inequality, that's like the worst time for us to be giving big tax cuts to the wealthy and corporations.
I'm right there with you. The Club for Growth just came out and said that they weren't in favor of the Senate plan, because and this is, again, I guess, par for the course with the Club for Growth. It doesn't go far enough, and it engages in what they called class warfare, because we expect the wealthy to pay a little bit more. We expect those who have extreme wealth to be able to contribute a little bit more. To them, that's class warfare.
Yeah, and they engage in a lot of that themselves, because they're fond of saying that 45% of the population doesn't pay any tax. That is grossly inaccurate, because the people who don't pay any income tax pay a lot of payroll tax, excise taxes, state and local property taxes, all kinds of taxes. So they pay tax. They just may not, at the very low end, pay income tax.
Let me ask you the other side of this, because, the fear is that, like with a lot of, I remember the Bush years where everyone was running to their mailbox to get their Bush prize because they mailed out checks for $300 a piece. And, we thought we got something, but in looking back at it, boy, the working class of this country really got stiffed, and those at the top did really, really magnificently well. This to me seems like, the repeat of that. So how do we get past people going, oh, I'm going to get $100 or $200, and for them it actually meaning something, while really the fox is taking all the hens.
Yeah, they need to understand that despite a few crumbs they get right now, potentially, and by the way, in these bills, it's not clear that everybody in the lower and middle income ranges would get any crumbs, but there are some people who would lose out. But the other problem is that it blows a big hole in the deficit, and that means down the road we're going to have to pay for it, as I was saying earlier. And there's no question that many of the programs that would be cut would harm the very people who are getting those checks. So it's crumbs now, huge, loss later, essentially.
Yeah, last question I've got for you, because you look at this and again, it comes back to this, the winners and losers, and most of the working people of this country being the losers in this. When you look at this, is there a possibility of stopping it? Because, there's a lot of people who are upset about it, but, I got to be honest. I fear this goes through and we end up, another couple years down the road where Republicans then come back and say, oh, well, the deficit, the debt, it's so large, we've got to go back after again and cut Medicaid, again go after those quote unquote entitlements.
And you can be sure that's exactly what they'll do. I mean, I think it's really, really important for people to speak up now. The bill also shows that they're really trying to pull the wool over people's eyes. There's sneaking provisions in there that are not even related to tax. So, for example, they have a provision in there that provides a definition of an unborn child that would have implications down the road for abortion or further their anti-abortion agenda. They also have a provision in there that would enable political manipulation of nonprofits. Right now we have something called the Johnson Amendment that says that any nonprofit, whether it's a church or some other kind of nonprofit, a civic group or whatever, shouldn't be able to actually come out and support or against a political candidate. They can express opinions on policy issues, but they're not supposed to get engaged in electioneering. And they want to repeal that, and they've stuck that in this bill as well.
Well, again, I go back to what Paul Ryan said. This is a once in a generation opportunity. So they're going to throw all of their wish list into that one thing.
Yep, I think that's right.
Alexandra, I appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Just amazing stuff.
It's a move that would leave the U.S. completely isolated when it comes to the question of climate change.
Syria joins UN Paris climate agreement, leaving U.S. alone in climate denial.
Our businesses want people to know in the global community that the Trump administration doesn't speak for them.
But U.S. cities, states, and businesses are picking up the slack. Tuesday's election may result in a big blue wall of climate action on the U.S. West Coast. Plus,
there's no good squabbling over who is responsible or who should pay. Each country has to contribute.
The ozone hole is now the smallest on record, thanks to a global climate treaty.
All of those stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
The development comes as France confirms it has not invited the U.S. president to a climate summit in December.
I guess the bromance between Donald Trump and French President Emmanuel Macron is fini. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, the big off-year election on Tuesday wasn't just good news for Democrats. It might actually turn out to be good news for the planet.
Yes, indeed. Election Day on Tuesday was a victory for a very diverse slate of pro-environment progressive candidates winning state and local offices around the country, particularly in Washington state, where Democrats won a special election, now giving them majorities in both state chambers, joining California and Oregon as states with both a Democratic governor and Democratic majorities in both houses. A big blue wall in the West that could be good news for state-level climate action. Seattle Times reports that Washington's Democratic Governor Jay Inslee now plans an ambitious climate agenda.
He will now be able to do that because that agenda had been blocked by a one-seat Republican majority in the state Senate. And that's over, all the way from the Canadian border down to Mexico on the West Coast.
And then there was one. At the latest round of United Nations climate talks now underway in Bonn, Germany, Syria announced it will sign on to the Paris Climate Agreement to reduce carbon emissions, leaving the United States as the only nation on the planet to reject the accord, after U.S. President Donald Trump announced his intention to withdraw the United States in 2019. Further isolating Trump, France has announced it is not inviting the U.S. president to a climate summit in Paris in December.
Aw, sad.
But UN observers say China seems to be delighted to take over the leadership position.
Of course they are. So much winning.
At the same time, a coalition of U.S. governors, mayors, and CEOs are also now at the climate talks in Bonn as part of the We Are Still In coalition. Coalition member and Massachusetts State Representative Jennifer Benson, in an interview with WGBH Boston, says their goal is to show that the U.S. is making progress in spite of the administration.
We can go and show the world that, yes, we are still engaged. We're still in this fight. We believe this is an issue. And even if we have to do it on a state-by-state basis, we're still going to continue to work.
Meanwhile, President Trump himself is in Asia, and in a formal address to the South Korean parliament, he cited lack of electricity to criticize the North Korean regime's failure to provide for its people.
Families live in homes without plumbing, and fewer than half have electricity.
I think I see where you're going here.
Yeah, that's still more than families get in Puerto Rico as of Thursday. 7 weeks after Hurricane Maria hit the U.S. island territory, 60% of Puerto Ricans still lack electricity. But in better news, 85% of Puerto Ricans now have access to clean drinking water. But a boil water advisory remains in effect for the entire island. Puerto Rico's Bankruptcy Oversight Board has asked Congress this week for $21 billion in aid to fund basic government services. In Texas, in the wake of Hurricane Harvey, officials have asked Congress this week for funding to buy out thousands of the area's most flood-prone properties, the largest home buyout in U.S. history. But it might be a tough sell with Republicans focused on their $1.5 trillion tax cut bill. Finally, some good news. NASA has announced this week that the Earth's ozone hole this year shrunk to the smallest annual size on record since 1988. That was thanks to the world's first global climate treaty, the Montreal Protocol, which phased out the use of man-made chemicals that were destroying the planet's protective ozone layer. That was led by conservatives President Ronald Reagan and British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, and shows that the world can join together to solve problems and succeed.
Yes, global treaties work, unless we just pretend that they don't. For much more on all of those stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Don't forget you can download our reports anytime via Stitcher, TuneIn, or iTunes. Find us, follow us, and share us worldwide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
So the president is in China. I turn to Luke Vargas, Talk Media News. Luke. So the president is in China. I turn to Luke Vargas, Talk Media News. Luke, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, really glad to be with you.
So you find yourself in South Korea.
Yeah, I'm here in Seoul, about 25 miles from the DMZ, but I'm feeling like we're in the clear because President Trump has come and gone and the city isn't leveled.
I've seen some pictures coming out of the city. They're just incredible.
Yeah, it was an amazing trip. Both in Japan and then in South Korea, the president has been given really lavish welcoming ceremonies. I think if you look at Japan in particular, but also the way the Saudis treat him, there's sort of a playbook that is starting to become quite established for any leader that wants to get an in with President Trump about, bringing out the pomp and circumstance. He loves the military reviews, and in China right now, he's getting a lot of that.
Amazing stuff. Now, I understand the president was meeting with CEOs and the president of China today. What's going on? I know trade has been on the table. Any talk of any trade agreements? Any trade talk?
Well, lots of different things. But it's worth sort of separating the quote unquote deliverables, which are meant to sort of flatter the visitor, and then the actual trade talks that are going on behind the scenes, which are often much more contentious and move along at a snail's pace. So in the former category, the deliverables, there was an announcement yesterday of $250 billion, so $250 billion in new deals between American and Chinese companies. If you actually go through it, though, with a comb, you'll see that most of these things, and this is not uncommon, it's not like President Trump is being duped in a way that past leaders were, but these deals are often stuffed together, and it brings together deals that were already announced, things
Right.
that are pending, things that could be canceled or never brought to fruition. And a lot of it is, purchases by companies with existing customers. So, for example, Qualcomm, which makes chips for smartphones and things, does half its business in China. And so them announcing yesterday, we're going to sell umpteen billion more dollars of chips to China isn't really a surprise or all that meaningful. And it's not a deal that Trump really had any hand in promoting. It was just the natural order of things. On the other hand, there were a few bigger parts of the deal, actually, that was announced yesterday that are more meaningful. The biggest one being a $43 billion announcement by China's sort of sovereign wealth fund to invest in a liquefied natural gas project in Alaska. This has long been talked about. Sarah Palin was trying to promote this deal when she was the governor. It never came through. Now we're hearing that Chinese energy corporations and their investment fund are going to pour $43 billion into Alaska to build the pipeline, the liquefied natural gas export terminal, and then help bring that to China over a multi-year or multi-decade process. So, I'd put that in the camp of actually sort of a meaningful announcement. But once again, look at the fine print there, and it's still a memorandum of understanding. It's not actually pen on paper. So there'll still be many more years to go to see if that actually gets built.
Yeah, but and going back to the big number that they throw out, and look, all administrations have done it, but isn't it a bit disingenuous for this administration to do it, considering that Donald Trump said that basically all of the trade problems up until this point are the responsibility of of past administrations, and it's all their fault.
Yeah, and if you actually look at his words in announcing the deal, I mean, there's a few flattering things he said about Chinese, and it's great doing business with them. But he's still complaining about a whole raft of issues. And, he's been in all his stops on this Asia trip in Japan and South Korea, he's been mixing his language. He'll say, we want international unity on North Korea. And then he comes and says, but trade is really unfair and we need to tackle the trade imbalance. And we are hearing that there is going to be no, pause to an American complaints about China's trade practices at the WTO. They are going to continue their investigation in Congress into Chinese companies taking over sensitive sectors of the U.S. economy, and the ongoing investigation into theft of American intellectual property by China is proceeding. So, on one hand, it's great, they're making deals, but the trade war actually looks like it's continuing. It's just sort of being papered over this week by some flashy deals.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I'm actually in favor of looking into that stuff and actually talking about currency manipulation, which did that come up at all in their meetings?
No, and we didn't get a very detailed readout, but that was not one of the issues talked about in the sort of the joint press conference.
Right.
But again, Trump was very clear saying, look, I want American cars, the American financial industry to have greater access into China. And it's very true. I mean, President Xi Jinping of China, in his remarks, I mean, he is trying to fill a vacuum on the world stage. He feels like the sort of global economic leadership championed by past U.S. presidents, Republican and Democratic, has ended. And so China has a moment to step up and say, we're ready to do business with everyone. But if you actually look at the fine print, only a very small portion of the Chinese economy is actually being opened up to American business. I think in the finance sector, it's less than 2% of all financial transactions in China are done by American financial corporations. So they're kind of pretending, playing the role of being the proponent of free trade and opening up their economy to the rest of the world. But in truth, China is still really quite hesitant to do that.
Well, I mean, they're smart. They're protecting their own interests, and that's what negotiations are about. Let me ask you the other side of this. You mentioned North Korea a minute ago. Any discussions on China stepping up and putting maybe Kim Jong-un in his place a little bit, tapping down the heated rhetoric? Any word there?
A little bit. The biggest announcement as it pertains to China's actions to contain North Korea came the day before President Trump landed in Beijing, and they said they're going to stop all tourist travel by Chinese citizens to North Korea. The U.S. did this several months ago. We put them on. They're the only country now that American citizens cannot get clearance by the American government to travel to. China is now adding their own tourists to that, which is meaningful. It is 80% of all the visitors to North Korea are Chinese, and if you are sort of trying to figure out a strategy that will both deny the North Koreans cash, which is something that state really needs, and tourists literally come into North Korea and spend cash, which is quite useful. That's getting sucked away. But, North Korea has long diverted a lot of its, limited state revenues towards these sort of vanity projects, building a ski slope or a water park. And North Koreans don't get to enjoy these things, but visitors do. And then the government photographs them and says, look, our country is so welcoming and everyone wants to come and see how great our things are. If you really do end American and Chinese tourism into North Korea, those sites will probably lay fallow. And that is seen by American policymakers as a good thing, because it sort of embarrasses the North Korean government. But that's about it we've heard from China on North Korea so far.
Okay. Now, I understand the president's also going to Vietnam. And there was some talk of him meeting with Vladimir Putin. Any developments there?
Yeah, I believe he's leaving Beijing in about an hour's time and will be touching down in Vietnam about midday here, so 4 or 5 hours. And yeah, there's going to be a big economic summit, and Vladimir Putin is one of the country, Russia is one of the countries there, and Vladimir Putin will be in attendance. I think I've been looking at statements by this administration about this meeting and how they're handling it. And I sense that there is growing concern about the sort of Russiagate investigation in the administration because of how apologetic they are for the prospect of even having a one-on-one meeting. There was a statement by Secretary Tillerson yesterday saying, we can't confirm Russian reports that President Putin and President Trump will meet because we're still doing a review to think about if there are enough issues of mutual concern for them to meet. That's absurd because, whether or not Russia interfered in the election, there are plenty of very obvious, very important reasons for these countries to meet. So this notion, which it seems like a big excuse to say, oh, we're still thinking about it. It should not be an easy, a difficult decision from Syria to the Donbass, to Arctic issues, to global terrorism, to containment of North Korea. Those are all central foreign policy objectives for the U.S., and I find it quite odd Secretary Tillerson would pretend to suggest otherwise.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And moving aside on another topic, what's going on in Syria? I understand there's some stuff going on with them in the Islamic State.
Yes, Syria, as of today, this morning, sort of Middle Eastern time, has taken back all towns in Syria that once belonged to the Islamic State. So that doesn't mean every single fighter is dead. It's actually believed many of them have sort of fled cities and gone into the desert and are sort of hunkering down to try and reemerge at some later date. But if you just sort of look at territorial gains, and sorry for the sirens in the background, Syria has been purged of the Islamic State. I think the real danger here is that as much as this victory against the caliphate has been quite swift in recent months, surprisingly swift, that there are worrying developments in both Syria and Iraq that create the prospect of vacuums of power that the Islamic State or sort of splinter groups could occupy later on. In Iraq, of course, you've got the Iraqi government now fighting with Kurds. That is going to create lawless areas, which are the perfect place for the Islamic State to sprout up. And in Syria, the reason that the caliphate was brought down so quickly is you had two different fighting forces. You had the Syrians backed by the Russians and Iran, and Hezbollah, and you had the United States, which was backing Kurdish groups on the ground. And now we're hearing from the Syrians that they want to go and recapture all the Kurdish territories. So once again, it's not like the caliphate's over and the nation states are solid. It's quite the opposite, and I think that should make us worried about the next few months and years and the Islamic State fighters finding another place to create some sort of stronghold in the future.
There you go. Luke, I appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
You're very welcome. Take care.
Luke Vargas, Talk Media News, their chief foreign correspondent. Quick break, right back. Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, ricksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. So on Tuesday, again, another one of these moments where you go mega. The new campaign slogan for 2020 for Republicans and Donald Trump will be mega. Making exploitation great again. Because on Tuesday, what you saw was the House Republicans in what was, for the most part, a party line vote, 242 to 181. There were 8 Democrats who flipped on this House Resolution 3441. And you go, what is that? It is the Save Local Businesses Act. And you go, well, who could be against saving local business, Rick? And most people would say, well, no one. until you find out what exactly the Save Local Business Act actually is. What it is you may remember back during the Obama years, there was this case that was going on. It's been going on for a long time. It was the BFI case, the Browning-Ferris industry case, where they're this big California recycling subsidiary of Republic Services and all of this stuff, where the Teamsters had organized them and said, look, they are, for all intent and purposes, the workers for Republic Services. It's a spinoff. Republic Services has all the control. So, they should be considered the same. And look, it's going through court, and we'll get a decision here pretty soon. It's going through the whole D.C. Circuit Court. But what the NLRB did, they said, look, we have a belief that, if, this idea of joint employers, where if you are the overseer company and you have control over the workforce of a franchisee, a subsidiary, they work for you. And where this is important is especially in the fast food industry, where, the franchisees have taken over. Yet McDonald's, we'll say McDonald's or Wendy's or Burger King or any of them, because you do understand that almost none of your local fast food joints are owned by the name on the building. They're owned by local people who may own one or two of them, maybe a handful. And, they pay a franchise fee to the brand for the advertising and all the distribution and the machinery and the training and all of that stuff. The brand owns very few actual structures. And for them, it's great because they can have, plausible deniability. We don't know what the local, whatever place is doing. Not our problem. What this is saying is, look, you set the standards. You make all of your franchisees follow a code of conduct, a series of rules for the workforce. They have to wear the uniform. They have to you do certain things in ways that are trademarked by your brand. And they're saying that they're employees. And why this is important is, especially in the fast food industry, where you look at some of these big brands and they've got through the franchisees, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of employees. Now, if you wanted to organize those employees, you would have to go building by building and have organizing campaigns and votes in each and every building, each and every restaurant, and every little small backwater town across this country. It's never going to happen. And it's one of these loopholes in our labor law, a way to really skirt the ability of workers, especially in low-wage industries, to fight for better wages, hours, and conditions. Whereas if you're saying, look, the main brand, even though they have all these franchise agreements, they exert control over the workforce. The workforce is then technically employed by them. It's a whole nother ball of wax. So what this has done, what this House resolution has done, has done away with this indirect language. If you have indirect control over the subcontractor or the employee of a franchisee, or you look at FedEx as another example, a lot of their drivers are they're independent contractors. Yet you have to wear the uniform, you have to drive the truck, you have to be where you're supposed to be, when you're supposed to be. You have schedules, and it's, where is this? You're your own boss. You're just working for a company, following all of their rules, all of their code of conduct at their behest, and yet you have none of the protections of labor law. So what the Obama NLRB said is, no, you would be an employee. Under this bill, the standard of indirect control then and joint employment would be changed to read, quote, only if such person directly, actually, and immediately, and not in a limited or routine manner, exercises significant control over the essential terms and conditions of employment. That's pretty ironclad, that saying that, all the fast food joints, under that, you're not employees. There's just no way. Same thing with FedEx or any of these other trucking companies that you're your own boss, but you better be where we tell you you're going to be or you're not going to get paid. And oh, by the way, we're going to make wage theft great again as well. Because ultimately what this does, and all you really have to do is look at who lined up against this. The National Federation of Independent Business, the NFIB, Federation of Independent Business, the Chamber, the restaurant associations, all of the waste association. You name the industry, their lobbyists were against it. Their lobbyists were saying, no, we need the Republican version. We need the Save Local Business Act. And the people who were saying, look, this is a bad piece of legislation that the Republicans are pushing, were basically labor groups. They were the people who are out there fighting every day for better wages, hours, and conditions. And again, you look at this and now understand this could be all moot because you've got a Trump NLRB. They could simply overturn the ruling of the Obama NLRB, which again is part of my problem with how the NLRB has become this political football with these wide swings in labor policy. But here again, another one of those things that make you go, this is how we're going to make America great again? And the answer is, well, yeah, it all depends on which great America you're looking at. Are we going back to the days of Lochner? Are we going back to the 1880s, 1890s, to where if you were desperate enough, you could be, working in terrible conditions for poverty wages, company script, company stores, company housing? You got to wonder. Because if you look at what they've done already, and look, the enforcement of labor law in this country is almost non-existent, to be honest. If you work for a living, chances are you're exploitable. And I think that's just where they want us. So when I look at this case, and again, you come back to this premise that I have, which is our labor law is fundamentally broken. The ossification of our labor law has really done, well, it benefits only the big corporations and the powerful and the wealthy. And you wonder why union density in this country is so low in the private sector, because it's a Herculean leap for workers to organize. Now they're still doing it, and you got to go, just amazing that still people are backed into a corner where, even as difficult as it can be, that people are still doing it. And as many of these gimmicks and these schemes and these business models that keep popping up, people are still fighting. And I keep asking the question, I've asked it a million times, when do we say, the New Deal era, that labor piece is over? Because here again, what's happened is we've created an environment where it's almost impossible to hold employers accountable. It's almost impossible to hold them accountable. And you say at some point, do we not take to the streets? Just one of those moments. And not surprising that this was a party line vote, with the exception of 8 corporate Democrats. This is the policy that they want for us. This is the direction that they keep pushing us, which is voiceless on the job. Voiceless. We keep hearing Trump and the rest of them talking about we want rising wages. Unemployment is extremely low. And yet wages really aren't going up. Because, I hear people say, well, you got to be able to ask your employer for a raise. They're saying no. What you have to be able to do is you have to be able to demand a raise. If profits are at record highs, wages should be going up, unquestioningly. If CEO bonuses are going through the roof and we're talking about massive tax cuts for the 1%, shouldn't the working people of this country see a bit of that in return? You know, we used to believe in this idea and this concept of a meritocracy, that you work hard, play by the rules, get ahead. The more work you do, the more wealth you create. We used to believe in that. The question is, do we still? Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back and talk about we talk about Roy Moore. Quick break, right back.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a diversified media enterprises production. I'm Doug Cunningham. The New Jersey AFL-CIO says the election of Phil Murphy as governor and Sheila Oliver as lieutenant governor speaks to the unmatched mobilization efforts of organized labor and the New Jersey AFL-CIO's political program that is unparalleled by any other in our state or nation. AFL-CIO in New Jersey says that effort included thousands of union volunteers, national, state, and local affiliates, central labor councils, and building trades councils. Phone banks were activated and thousands of mail pieces delivered statewide. In addition to the governor and lieutenant governor, labor in New Jersey also expanded pro-labor majorities in the state legislature. 43 rank-and-file union members running for public office won their elections. New Jersey AFL-CIO says working people needed a victory and organized labor delivered. Republicans in the Wisconsin State Senate have made it the 28th state to call for a new U.S. constitutional convention. It takes 34 states to actually call a convention to rewrite America's Constitution. The resolution 28 states have now passed says that the purpose of the Constitutional Convention shall be, quote, for the limited purpose of requiring the federal government to operate under a balanced budget. But once the Constitutional Convention Pandora's box is open, it could well turn into a runaway convention where other constitutional rewrites could happen. And since it's driven by state legislatures controlled by Republicans, America could wake up one day to a new U.S. Constitution written essentially by Republicans. Just 14 states had legislatures totally controlled by Republicans in 2009. In 2017, there are 33 such states. In 2010, the GOP was able to gerrymander congressional districts, cementing the Republican state-level political power and protecting its congressional seats. The constitutionality of that gerrymandering is being decided in a case from Wisconsin currently before the U.S. Supreme Court. The Pension Benefits Guaranty Corporation, PBGC, has reached a new agreement with Sears that will put $500 million into two Sears pension plans that have approximately 100,000 people in them. The deal frees the struggling Sears from having to protect subsidiaries holding real estate and intellectual property for the benefit of those pension plans. The deal is expected to take a few months to close, and when it does, Sears will be free to sell off more of its assets. Sears has been losing billions of dollars in recent years. WIN is America's multimedia news voice for workers.
We need to make more money. You know, what they're paying us, a greedy corporation, they just want to pay us what they want to pay us. And it's not right.
We are sick of an economy and a democracy that are rigged against us.
Support WIN's worker news mission at workersindependentnews.com. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit workersindependentnews.com.
Absence works. Maybe it's the way it's being taught or the way that it's being applied out there. But the fact of the matter is, it is the best form of to teach our children.
I wanna be a cowboy, and you can be my cowgirl. I wanna be a cowboy.
Yes. I gotta be honest. Yeah, I hear that and my head just almost explodes. To be honest, as crazy as Rick Perry was, I look at what's going on in Alabama right now is just completely nuts. Really, honestly, just off the rails. Because you've got a guy who is a religious zealot, and look, you've got he was the guy on the Supreme Court of Alabama who insisted that the Ten Commandments be done full display, this massive 2-ton structure with the Ten Commandments. And I have this theory. I've had this theory for a very long time, and it usually turns out to be spot on accurate. I remember a number of years back, I had interviewed the pastor James David Manning, the guy who used to call Obama Mac Daddy. And I had him on, and he's the head of the Ottawa World Baptist Church in New York. And Roy Moore came up. And I said, well, let me ask you, Reverend, Roy Moore wants the 10 Commandments plastered everywhere. What do you think? He goes, I'm all on board with Roy Moore. We should have the 10 Commandments everywhere. And I go, okay, well, here my question is tell me them. You want them plastered all over the place? Tell me them. You're a pastor. You're a reverend. You should be able to zip, 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 bang, bang. And he evaded that for a good 2 or 3 minutes, saying that, no, I got the good book right here. I'll read it. And I'm like, no. I don't want you to read them to me. I don't want you to regurgitate from the book. I want you to tell me. Make up your own words if you have to. Tell me what they are. If you're someone who believes in the 10 Commandments and, we should, you respect our parents and not murder and not steal and not cheat or covet or false gods or a Sabbath or go on, word name in vain, go down the list. Tell me, what are they? And he's like, oh, I'm going to read them out of the book. I have this theory that the people who want them plastered everywhere, either one, aren't smart enough to remember them, or two, are breaking every damn one of them. So I look at a zealot like Roy Moore. And this story, while I cannot verify its accuracy, wouldn't surprise me one bit. It would not surprise me that a 32-year-old man would hit on a 14-year-old girl, because look, not only did this woman come forth, now she's 53 years old now, we're talking years and years ago, but 3 other women who, they were 16, 17, and 18 at the time, right around that time, said the exact same thing. That this guy in his 30s was hitting on young girls. And this afternoon, I'm thinking this question through. I'm going, is this when he found religion? Is this when he saw the light, the errors in his ways? Like an alcoholic or a drug addict or a sex offender? Is this when he found his rigid ideology? Because understand, this is a guy who was thrown off a case a number of years back because, there was a woman who had admitted to being a lesbian at one point who wanted to have shared custody of her kids. He said she should have no visitation rights whatsoever. You got to wonder if there's any of that in the background as well. Anytime I think of that, you go back and you think of the stories over the years of all of these religious zealots who really dark, ugly skeletons in the closet. And I look at this guy and like I said, I can't say that this guy did this, but when 4 people come forward and say, you know what, this happened to me, that he's going to go and hit on a 14-year-old Santa's helper as a 32-year-old attorney, something's seriously wrong. Now, the other thing that is frustrating and really just bizarre to me is the people who will come and defend. You had Sean Hannity defending him today. You had the Auditor General, the state auditor there in Alabama, coming out and defending him. In fact, in a really bizarre way. And this is more of that religious dog whistle, talking about, Joseph was an older man. Mary, she was a young girl. Going all biblical. And you go, what? Really? Is someone going to buy that? Are the religious people going to buy it? And that's what, again, I think this election is going to be very interesting in that I don't know. They did, after all, vote for Donald J. Trump, who you heard in his voice say, I just walk up and grab him, you know where. So, to me, this is another one of those moments where you go, Really? Now you have this auditor general, or this state's auditor, who seemed to be, not at all fazed by the allegations. Evidently, he told the Washington Examiner that his concerns, any political concerns, would be set aside by three things. One, evidently, Moore never had sexual intercourse with her, and she admits that. It was just kissing and petting and that kind of stuff. The other thing was it was 40 years ago. And the other thing is Roy Moore fell in love with one of the younger women. And I guess married one of them. According to Ziegler, the guy who's the state's auditor, he said of this Roy Moore's wife, Kayla, he dated her, he married her, and they've been married for about 35 years. They're blessed with a wonderful marriage, and his wife, Kayla, is 14 years younger. And you go, 14 years younger at 35 puts someone at 21. That's legal. 14 is a whole nother ball of wax. If a 32-year-old man came after my 15-year-old daughter, I would go biblical on their behind. I would beat them within an inch of their life until they wished they were gone. And I go, oh, you can't say that. No, I can. Now, Ziegler also went on to preach in the Bible. Got to go to Scripture. He says, quote, take the Bible, Zechariah and Elizabeth, for instance. Zechariah was extremely old to marry Elizabeth, and they became the parents of John the Baptist. He also invoked Christ, said also take Joseph and Mary. Mary was a teenager, and Joseph was an adult carpenter. They became parents of Jesus. There is nothing immoral or illegal here, according to Mr. Ziegler. Maybe just a bit unusual. And I finish with that because a bit unusual, I don't know, maybe for Alabama, it's a bit unusual. The rest of us are repelling. The rest of us are looking at this going, this guy could be sitting in the U.S. Senate. This kind of, now, of course, Roy Moore denies it. And you're going to have to take and judge for yourself based on the four people that have come forth. But at the end of the day, wouldn't surprise me one little bit. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. When we come back, we're going to talk with Matthew Chapman, national political writer over at Share Blue. Get some of his thoughts on not only Roy Moore, but yesterday's bloodbath, and find out where things are going with him. Quick break, right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show.
People are through. Me and my people are ready. Me and my people are just about due. I'm a massive airstrike on a beautiful night. Yeah, it's my song I'm singing. Somebody better start counting. We're coming out. We're coming out swinging.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1952. That was the day that the labor movement lost Philip Murray. Philip was born in Scotland in 1886 to an Irish Catholic family. His father was a coal miner and a union leader. Philip followed his father into the mines at just the age of 10 years old. The father and son made the trip to the Pennsylvania coal fields together when Philip was just 16. They saved enough money and then sent for the rest of their family. One day, Philip got into an altercation with one of his bosses. Not only was he fired, his entire family was kicked out of their company home. From that point on, Philip was dedicated to the union cause as the only hope for working people. He quickly rose through the ranks of the United Mine Workers, becoming vice president by the time he was 33. He worked closely with United Mine Workers president John L. Lewis. During the 1930s, there became a nationwide drive to organize industrial workers. Philip was appointed to lead the Steelworkers Organizing Committee, a key sector for the industrial effort. The Steelworker Campaign met with historic success. They reached a collective bargaining agreement with U.S. Steel, the giant of the industry. Philip went on to become the first president of the United Steelworkers of America, as well as president of the Congress of Industrial Organizations. Under his leadership, industrial labor became a powerful force. But that force was checked by the passage of the Anti-Union Taft-Hartley Act in 1947. The anti-communist hysteria of the Red Scare also took its toll on the CIO, forcing Philip to expel some of the most radical unions from the organization. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So, another Christian zealot, Kim Davis. You remember her? You know, the one who wouldn't allow the gay couples to marry, give out the licensing, because after all, it was her job. Evidently, she's going to run for re-election. And the good thing, and again, I keep coming back to the poetic justice, just like we saw in Virginia, the person that she denied the marriage license to, they're going to be the ones running against her. And look, hopefully Kentucky, if you're listening, by all means, a good behind whipping should be sent her way. Now I'm talking at the polls on election day by voting her out of office. Don't make her any more of a martyr than she already claims to try and be. Anyway, let's talk a little bit with our good friend Matt Chapman, a national political writer over at Share Blue. Matthew, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you so much for having me on.
So what do you think? Kim Davis running for re-election. What more can you say?
Well, I mean, it is not at all out of character for her. I mean, it's exhibited also a history of martyr politics. She views herself as a victim of, when she equates victimhood with let's call it a loss of privilege, and she's desperate to reassert herself, as are many of these people who have sprung up around around the age of Trump.
No, I mean these Christian zealots are just it's one of these things that finally and hopefully that we as a society start pushing back. And I look at what's going on in Alabama, and I wanted to get some of your thoughts on this because Roy Moore to me is one of the most rigid, most zealot ideologues that I've seen in a very long time, and it scares the living daylights out of me that someone like him could sit in the U.S. Senate. I'm curious your thoughts of the allegations, though.
It really doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, if you look at the Family Research Council, the hate group that hosts Values Voters Summit, and they invited him out there, and he told everyone that the United States would be judged if they don't follow a path of righteousness. And now, flash forward, turns out that by 4 women of basically stalking them and making advances at them when they were little, preying on them, and the youngest one apparently he was waiting around outside a custody hearing to find her. Doesn't say like hardened sexual predator. I don't know what does.
Yeah, no, I mean you're absolutely right, and we're gonna go hit on her while she's helping Santa wrap presents. Just crazy, but I have this, I've got this theory, and I want to run it by you. Because Moore is one of these guys who wants the 10 Commandments everywhere, and I have this belief that those folks, either one are too stupid to remember the 10 rules, or they break every last one of them, and they need the constant reminder to be a decent human being. Because I look at people who are religious zealots, and look, there's nothing wrong with people being religious, going to church and believing in God. That's not. It's the people who take it to the absolute extreme. To me, those are the people who, maybe they were alcoholics, or maybe they were drug addicts, or in this case, maybe sex offenders.
Well, I mean, you hit on a really good point. I mean, there is nothing inherently wrong with religious belief. And indeed, I have seen many people do amazing, beautiful work and amazing political activism motivated by religion. You need to only look at the Reverend Dr. Barber and his work. But, yeah, there's all kinds of people who, they would call themselves God-fearing. They're people who have a very, very authoritarian view of Christianity. And these are the people who want to force their beliefs on others. And yes, many of them seem to have dark sorts of episodes in their past that indicate that they themselves are, the exact sort of immorality they claim to be.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think of the auditor, the state's auditor in Alabama, and his view? This guy Jim Ziegler, who said, hey, Jesus and Jesus's parents, Joseph was an old carpenter, Mary was a young virgin, you got Zechariah and Elizabeth, you got all this stuff in the Bible. There's nothing to see here. There's his exact words. There's just nothing immoral or illegal here.
Well, it seems to me that he forgot the most important part of that biblical metaphor. I mean, you don't get more illogical than slut-shaming the Virgin Mary.
Yeah, good point. Now, the thing that worries me is that there are going to be those out there who take that very simple message of his and go, well, yeah, that makes sense. Because, look, Alabama's not, in my view, all that forward thinking. And maybe, I don't know. I've been to Alabama only a handful of times. I'm going from purely stereotypes, where maybe a 32-year-old guy and a 14-year-old girl are the norm. Am I off base?
I mean, I will tell you this. I have been to Alabama. I have some wonderful family members who live there, in fact. And there are some wonderful people in Alabama, but there's also just there can be something of a culture there that that is very insular, that really doesn't admit much to outside thought. I mean, that's the sort of thing that can cause dangerous things like this.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of it, it'll be interesting to see how Alabama, how the voters turn out on this. I want to go back and ask you about Tuesday, because Tuesday, I got to be honest, on Wednesday morning, I woke up feeling a little bit of hope. I'm feeling a little bit better. There was a bloodbath for Republicans on Tuesday. A lot of people, took to running for office and won, pushing back in some very interesting races. I wanted to get your thoughts on it.
I did too. It felt like a tremendous validation of everything that all the people that I know and respect have been working for ever since Trump's election. And one of the things that really gave me so much hope is this is just 3 months after the riots in Charlottesville, where my parents happen to live too. I absolutely love that city, and it was such a nightmare to see what's happening on those streets. And seeing the people wearing torches chanting that they will not be replaced. And then flash forward to today, pretty much one of the most diverse crop of new legislators that you would ever see, including the second ever black lieutenant governor of the state. And then there was the trans woman who defeated that guy who called himself homophobe. It was just such an inspiring night in so many ways.
Yeah, I mean, that race was great because he was the guy who he got beat by a transgender woman he was the guy who put forth the bathroom bill. So I mean, there's a lot of messaging that come out in New Jersey. The woman beat the guy who put out the meme of for the Women's Day March, asking if she'll be home in time to cook dinner. He got to eat crow for dinner that night. It just seemed like it seemed like a good night. Now the question I have, though,
and another thing that I thought was terrific about that night was, in the week preceding, there were all kinds of just horrific racist flyers sent out to voters. And in New Jersey there was this one showing like two candidates, and it said "deport" underneath them, and they were both Americans. They won their races. Like everyone who was targeted by these racist flyers, they ended up winning.
Yeah. I thought Ted Lieu had the best tweet of the day, though, basically saying, Donald Trump, please endorse my opponent.
Pretty much should be the wake-up Republicans should be seeing.
Do you think that had anything to do with today the Senate, pulling back some of the ugly provisions in their tax bill? I mean, pushing off the corporate tax cuts for another year. Do you think that played into it? Because look, I want whoever the genius was who dropped the House bill a week before the election. Thank you. Maybe do it again next year. But do you think the Senate played into their calculus?
Yeah, I think that I can't begin to guess what's in the minds of these folks. I mean, they've made it clear, with Chris Collins in the House and with Lindsey Graham in the Senate, that they're doing this because they're terrified they're going to lose their money from billionaires. That's pretty much. I feel like that is still their chief calculus here, and I think that in time they're going to have to come to realize that unless they're actually in Kansas or something, the Koch brothers are not their constituents. They need to listen to the people who actually decide whether they're reelected.
Yeah, well, at the end of it, I think Representative Collins from New York said it best when he said, "If we don't pass this tax bill, my donors are saying don't ever call me again."
Yep, exactly. Well, what about his constituents? Maybe he could be taking some of their calls.
Well, come on, they don't write big checks, Matthew. Come on.
That's true. That's true. I was born in Rochester, which is not terribly far from the boundaries of his district.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Maybe you should go back and vote against him.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure with where I live, specifically where his district is now, but that would be something.
But doesn't that send kind of a message though when that's the first thing that he's thinking about is how much campaign cash he's going to lose on this vote, and not really just how bad this piece of legislation is?
It absolutely does. And there's one other thing that I think is just as revealing. The day after the election, Paul Ryan came out and said, the result of the election means that more than ever that we have to work on tax reform. I mean, any reasonable person in a party that gets walled like that would conclude maybe we should step back from what we're working on if we release this bill to the people and it's super unpopular and we just got and we just lost a bunch of seats in an election. No, in his calculus, this means that all right, people hate our bill, so we have to ram it through as quickly as possible before they vote us out.
Well, no, I mean, it's in their rhetoric. I mean, this is a once in a generation opportunity, a once in a lifetime opportunity to get what we want. Because I think they got to know, especially with all the defections and the retirements that are happening, that there's going to be another bloodbath come 2018, unless the Democrats screw it up, which is always possible. I'm just hoping it doesn't.
Yeah, me neither. And I will be working my ass off for the next year to make sure that doesn't happen, and that the bloodbath is very real and very bloody.
Because at the end of the day, you look at some of the really ugly stuff that's been going on, and the tax bill being one of the healthcare stuff, just something completely else. All of the people that they've put in charge of regulatory agencies and the destruction that's been going on there. I mean, the reality is we're not seeing the destruction right in front of us yet, but it's coming because you can't neglect a structure. You can't neglect an institution for forever and expect it to still be standing and strong.
Exactly. And one thing that I worry about is that when Trump is finally out of office, a lot will depend on how many of these radical judges get through. Because they will be there to influence policy for long after he's gone.
Yeah, I mean, he's already done enough damage with Neil Gorsuch, and I expect horrible things out of the Supreme Court, not just this term.
Absolutely. It's it is a small consolation, but a consolation nonetheless, that all reports out of the Supreme Court indicate that almost none of the other justices like him.
Yeah, it's true, but it doesn't matter. Ideological.
I know it doesn't, because he's still a vote.
Yeah, I mean, like there's a case going on, the AFSCME case, the Janus versus AFSCME case, which once they decided and Kennedy cast the vote along with Gorsuch and Alito and Roberts and Thomas, it's going to destroy labor in this country for the next at least a generation.
Yeah, I mean, that whole logic. I just have a hard time reconciling the idea that a fair share would be against the First Amendment when when on the other side you have the Republicans trying to get rid of the Johnson and having the allowing churches to spend tax-exempt money on political organizations. How do you reconcile those two ideas?
We win, you lose.
Pretty much. I think that's right.
We have the power and the control, and we're going to do whatever we want. How do you look? How do you put that into a tax plan? How do you put how do you put the we're now evidently going to allow fetuses to have 529 savings accounts while we're stealing education money from people who are alive? Really? We're going to do that?
And when they're actually getting rid of, did you notice that they even went out of their way to get rid of the deduction for teachers to buy school supplies for underprivileged students? So my wife is a public school teacher in a rural part of Texas, and her jaw just dropped when I told her about that provision. She could not believe that anyone, even Republicans, could be that cruel.
Oh, sure they can.
Well, we know that.
No, I mean, when I saw that, I go, that's a shot at teachers. Because look, these are people who don't believe, they don't like teachers. They don't believe in public education. They don't believe anything should be in their hands.
I mean, my state is one of 5 states that just completely bans any collective bargaining by teachers. I mean, there are sort of shell unions here where that give teachers legal representation, but they're not allowed to do any, bargaining for contracts, wages, anything.
Wow. And that's the vision that they have for the rest of the country. And look,
it is.
I tell people, look at Virginia, look at these right to work states and the poverty wages, the lack of benefits, the lack of health care and retirement, the unsafe conditions. That's what the Republicans want for the rest of the country.
It absolutely is. And we need to do everything we can to make sure that, all these radical pieces of legislation, radical appointees, we need to do everything we can on every front to minimize the damage.
I'm right there with you. Last question I've got for you. And back to Election Day. Did you see this coming? I mean, was this something that you go, this bloodbath it's going to happen, or were you like me going, I'm hoping we do okay. Everything's lining up. Where were you?
Well, I mean, I will say this. For the past several days before the election, I was on the phone banks, on social media, doing everything I could to promote this race, and I had no way of knowing exactly how it was going to go. I saw hopeful signs from a while before, although I refused to let myself be complacent. I refused to allow myself to think that we were going to win, and I feel like a lot of Democrats around the country did that, and I think that what that motivated them to do did all the difference.
Well, it's a good thing, and I'm happy. Matthew, I appreciate you taking some time for us, sharing some of your thoughts. I look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to come over anytime.
I appreciate it. Look forward to talking to you again real soon. Let's take a quick break. Back with your thoughts. 1-888-520-RICK. 1-888-520-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Own 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
It's a move that would leave the U.S. completely isolated when it comes to the question of climate change.
Syria joins UN Paris Climate Agreement, leaving U.S. alone in climate denial.
Our businesses want people to know in the global community that the Trump administration doesn't speak for them.
But U.S. cities, states, and businesses are picking up the slack. Tuesday's election may result in a big blue wall of climate action on the U.S. West Coast. Plus,
there's no good squabbling over who is responsible or who should pay. Each country has to contribute.
The ozone hole is now the smallest on record, thanks to a global climate treaty.
All of those stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment. The development comes as France confirms it has not invited the U.S. president to a climate summit in December. I guess the bromance between Donald Trump and French President Emmanuel Macron is fini. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, the big off-year election on Tuesday wasn't just good news for Democrats. It might actually turn out to be good news for the planet.
Yes, indeed. Election Day on Tuesday was a victory for a very diverse slate of pro-environment progressive candidates winning state and local offices around the country, particularly in Washington state, where Democrats won a special election, now giving them majorities in both state chambers, joining California and Oregon as states with both a Democratic governor and Democratic majorities in both houses. A big blue wall in the West that could be good news for state-level climate action. Seattle Times reports that Washington's Democratic Governor Jay Inslee now plans an ambitious climate agenda.
He will now be able to do that because that agenda had been blocked by a one-seat Republican majority in the state Senate, and that's over, all the way from the Canadian border down to Mexico on the West Coast.
And then there was one. At the latest round of United Nations climate talks now underway in Bonn, Germany, Syria announced it will sign on to the Paris Climate Agreement to reduce carbon emissions, leaving the United States as the only nation on the planet to reject the accord, after U.S. President Donald Trump announced his intention to withdraw the United States in 2019. Further isolating Trump, France has announced it is not inviting the U.S. president to a climate summit in Paris in December.
Aw, sad.
But UN observers say China seems to be delighted to take over the leadership position.
Of course they are. So much winning.
At the same time, a coalition of U.S. governors, mayors, and CEOs are also now at the climate talks in Bonn as part of the We Are Still In coalition. Coalition member and Massachusetts State Representative Jennifer Benson, in an interview with WGBH Boston, says their goal is to show that the U.S. is making progress in spite of the administration.
We can go and show the world that, yes, we are still engaged. We're still in this fight. We believe this is an issue. And even if we have to do it on a state-by-state basis, we're still going to continue to work.
Meanwhile, President Trump himself is in Asia, and in a formal address to the South Korean parliament, he cited lack of electricity to criticize the North Korean regime's failure to provide for its people.
Families live in homes without plumbing, and fewer than half have electricity.
I think I see where you're going here.
Yeah, that's still more than families get in Puerto Rico as of Thursday. 7 weeks after Hurricane Maria hit the U.S. island territory, 60% of Puerto Ricans still lack electricity. But in better news, 85% of Puerto Ricans now have access to clean drinking water. But a boil water advisory remains in effect for the entire island. Puerto Rico's Bankruptcy Oversight Board has asked Congress this week for $21 billion in aid to fund basic government services. In Texas, in the wake of Hurricane Harvey, officials have asked Congress this week for funding to buy out thousands of the area's most flood-prone properties, the largest home buyout in U.S. history. But it might be a tough sell with Republicans focused on their $1.5 trillion tax cut bill. Finally, some good news. NASA has announced this week that the Earth's ozone hole this year shrunk to the smallest annual size on record since 1988. That was thanks to the world's first global climate treaty, the Montreal Protocol, which phased out the use of man-made chemicals that were destroying the planet's protective ozone layer. That was led by conservatives President Ronald Reagan and British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, and shows that the world can join together to solve problems and succeed.
Yes, global treaties work, unless we just pretend that they don't. For much more on all of those stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Don't forget you can download our reports anytime via Stitcher, TuneIn, or iTunes. Find us, follow us, and share us worldwide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
So starting tomorrow, there's going to be a big march in the area where I live in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, of people who are saying, you know what, we want to end the obscene gerrymandering. We want to end the corruption. We want to take back our political system. And we want to get money out of this. At the end of the day, the corrosive effect of money and just these bizarrely drawn maps in a state where you have 1 million more registered Democrats, to have 5 of the 13 seats going to Democrats seems kind of, well, lopsided. And here to talk about the big march and what they hope to accomplish, I've asked Michael Pollock to come talk with us. He's executive director of March on Harrisburg. Michael, thanks for taking time for us.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So where and when is this going to kick off so people can mark it on their calendars?
Absolutely. Tomorrow morning, Friday morning, 9:30 a.m., Lancaster Square in downtown Lancaster. We're going to set off from there. 36 miles, 3 days until we get to Harrisburg on Sunday evening. You can go to our website, marchonharrisburg.org, or on Facebook, search March on Harrisburg. You can find where we're going to be the whole march. Come meet up with us. You can park your car. We'll shuttle you back and forth. Whatever it takes, come march with us.
Now, you guys have done some just fantastic work over the last several months. What made you jump into the middle of this? What made you, throw your life into pursuing this?
Absolutely. A lot of our team, we were activists in various fields. We were pushing for change, to stop climate change, raise the minimum wage, fight for school funding. And we all kept running into the same roadblock, and that roadblock being our corrupted political system and the fact that we do not live in a democracy. So after banging our heads up against the brick walls of corruption enough times, we realized we have to storm the castle and change the rules.
Yeah, I mean, I look at some of these maps, and I live in probably one of the most bizarrely drawn senatorial districts here in Pennsylvania. And it's just one of these things where you go, really? And where I live, you had to make up this kind of a mock drawing. It just doesn't make any sense. But again, it comes back to, as I've said for years, what we've got is political leaders choosing their voters, not voters choosing their political leaders.
I like to say it's more insidious than that even. It's political leaders who are able to punish other politicians as well. Gerrymandering and redistricting is used as a weapon by political leadership in Harrisburg to enforce party discipline. If you don't vote with the leadership, they'll draw you out of your district in the next chance they get. And it's also fascinating that it kind of works almost as collusion between the leaderships, because let's say Minority Leader Dermody is going to be drawing the maps coming up in 2021. Speaker Turzai will give him a list of people he should protect, and then everybody else, who cares, screw them. And so they collude so that the leadership, even if they're not the ones with the maps that time around, they will still be okay. But the rank and file are abused through this process. They're bullied, they're intimidated, and they're eventually drawn out if they buck the system.
Yeah, but isn't this an opportunity for those to say, you know what, who are being left out, to say, we're going to change this system, even just from us inside?
Absolutely. So we lobby a lot. We've met with over 230 of the 253 legislators, many of them multiple times over. And the growing resentment of rank and file membership inside the House across party lines it's stunning. It's phenomenal. And there's a revolution brewing within the legislature. And we're really there to kind of force that change and really press the issue and give them some encouragement, let them know that they can take on their leadership and that we have their back.
Now, there's House Bill 722 and Senate Bill 22. The goal of this is to end gerrymandering, and that's a great idea. How does it end gerrymandering?
Absolutely. So right now we have two sets of maps in Pennsylvania. We have the map for the House of Representatives in D.C. and the map for the state reps and the state senators. It's a fascinating situation because both of those maps, the congressional map is held by the Republicans and the state maps are held by the Democrats. And what we want to do is take both of those maps out of their hands and move them into the hands of an independent, nonpartisan citizens commission.
Now, is that done anywhere else in the country? I know there are a couple of states that I think do this. Are there examples?
Absolutely. California does it. Arizona does it. A few other states do it. And it's important to say the United States of America is the only country in the world where this happens, where politicians are allowed to draw their own lines. Everywhere else knows this is ridiculous, this is absurd, it's not even an issue.
And it's one of these things you would think would go right through. Let me ask you about this other thing. There's House Bill 39 and Senate Bill 132 with the goal of ending legalized bribery. And now, just the other day, we were talking about Republican Representative Collins from New York, who said that if the tax bill doesn't go through, that his donors have told him don't call them anymore. Yep. And you go right there, should be Exhibit A on why we've got such a corrupt system.
Absolutely. So in Harrisburg, in Pennsylvania, we have this phenomenon called unlimited gifts. And what that means is that literally anybody, whether you're a lobbyist, whether you have business before the state, whatever, you're allowed to give anything to state legislators. Even cash is still okay in the Senate. So what happens is these lobbyists come in and they wine and dine legislators 3-4 nights a week in Harrisburg, take them to the Penn State game, the Eagles game on the weekend, go on vacation with them to the Caribbean, go to the beaches in Italy, go to New Zealand, whatever, and they become their friends. And when somebody takes you on a vacation, does something nice for you, the natural human response is to write a thank you note and do something, appreciative for them.
Yeah.
That's only a problem when the person is a public servant.
Now, I have a friend who is a former congressman from Illinois, and he said, look, nobody ever bribed me, but a lot of people were really nice to me.
Oh, yeah.
And he said, look, if someone gives you $20,000 for your campaign, they're not buying you, but what they're getting is they're getting a piece of your ear. And more likely than not, they're going to lobby you, they're going to make their case, and chances are you will probably go their way.
So it's really hard to prove bribery nowadays. You have to really have a legal formula of I'm giving you item X so that you will vote on bill Y, and then that has to be agreed upon, and then it has to happen. But what happens is essentially bribery. So one industry, just as an example, the natural gas industry in Pennsylvania has 203 lobbyists in the state. That's one for each state representative. They expense, and that's a very intentional number there. They expense about $7 to $8 million a year in lobbying. We have no idea how much of that goes to unlimited gifts, but they run the show in the Capitol. Whenever we're there, they're everywhere. You go to a committee hearing with environmental regulations, they're there. And they take legislators to the Super Bowl. They take them to Italy, everywhere. And because of that, we're the only state that can't tax our natural gas industry. And on top of that, Pennsylvania as a state, we produce 1% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. They get away with a lot.
Yeah, well, again, it's money talks. And this is where, as I've said for a very long time, we've got to figure out how to get the corrosive effect of money out of the system and, and return it back to we the people. And I don't know how you do that other than just banning gifts from big corporations being a start, but also the transparency of who's giving what and all of that.
Absolutely. When March on Harrisburg started, we produced a list of necessary bills, and it's about 20 to 30 bills long. We have a long way to go. Pennsylvania, we were ranked 45th out of the 50 states by the Big Watchdog in 2016. We were labeled a partly free democracy. We need to do campaign finance reform. We need to do ballot reform. We need to reform how we do our elections, how we draw our maps. Nearly everything needs to be on the table right now.
So
we're in trouble.
I've had people tell me that we're almost as corrupt as Illinois or Louisiana.
We are actually more corrupt than Illinois. Louisiana is pretty far down there.
Yeah, we got ways to get to. So this March, the hope is that you're going to draw awareness. You're going to bring people in, and on Monday, I understand there's a big rally and a lobbying day to get legislators to maybe pay attention.
Absolutely. So we've been lobbying since January. We did a long march in May from Philadelphia to Harrisburg, and then we did 3 days of nonviolent civil disobedience back in May, all really targeting Chairman Metcalf, who's the chair of the House State Government Committee. He's been blocking all our bills. We tried to meet with him for several months. He kept ignoring us, so we showed up at his doorstep. Then we went back to lobbying over the summer and the fall. We were there for the majority of House session days. We know that these bills can pass, and so now we're marching again to raise awareness. And the beauty of the march is really it forms community as you march. You get to walk and talk with people. It's democracy in action. And then we're going to get to the Capitol. We have rallies Monday and Tuesday in the Rotunda, 10 a.m. Monday, noon on Tuesday. And I won't say any more because our lawyers tell us not to talk specifics about what's going to happen.
No, I look forward to seeing what's going to happen because I think we need these kind of moments to raise awareness and to bring people awake. Because look, I look at Daryl Metcalf, and the reality is this is one of these guys that you would think should be, a guy who definitely hates government and definitely wants to restrain it and all of that. You would think he would be on board with something like this.
Our gift ban bill, HB 39, was written by Representative Saccone, who's on the state government committee with Chairman Metcalf. They seem to be pretty good friends. We thought this was going to be a slam dunk. We knew it wasn't because we're challenging a culture of corruption that's obviously going to push back. But we picked this bill for a reason. We thought it was going to be friendly to him. But he's made it fairly clear that he has no intention of doing anything about this. And at this point, we're really just trying to pressure, force the issue, force the encounter, and keep moving him.
Yeah,
and also moving his committee to vote him down. There's a procedure, there's a mechanism where they can kind of take over the committee.
Kind of makes you wonder why he's not moving. Gotta wonder what's in that closet there. Let me ask you the other side of this, because some will say maybe this is because the Republicans control both houses of our General Assembly, that this is a partisan issue. In your view, is this partisan?
Not at all. Gifts are actually more of a problem with the Philadelphia Democrats than anybody else. That's why the Republicans introduced this bill. As I was telling a Democratic rep the other day, if you were the majority, we'd be talking about campaign finance reform right now, but you're not, so we're talking about gifts. And as far as gerrymandering goes, the Democrats are also an obstacle there, especially the leadership. Minority Leader Dermody's office has told me several occasions, we are looking forward to drawing the maps in 2021. We're going to draw as many Republicans off as we possibly can. This is our chance. We're going to take it.
Interesting. And well, very anti-democratic. Last question I've got for you. What can people do? What can we do to help? How can we move this stuff forward?
Absolutely. Follow us on Facebook, on Twitter at NPA Corruption, marchonharrisburg.org, so you can follow along. There's plenty of action steps there, calling Chairman Metcalf, calling his counterpart, Senator Fulmer, and then just showing up for the events. Come out and march with us for a block, for a day, whatever you can do. Come to the Capitol Monday at 10, Tuesday at noon. Not to sound overly dramatic, but this is a battle for the soul of the Republic. The question at this moment is, are we the people going to govern ourselves or not? And the answer right now is not. So please come on out and let's take back the Republic.
There you go. Michael, I appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Good talking with you. Again, one of these things, now is the time. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. This is Labor History. On this day in labor history, the year was 19. The Committee for Industrial Organizations was created by 8 unions as part of the American Federation of Labor. United Mine Workers President John L. Lewis was the driving force behind this new committee. His aim was to organize mass production industrial workers as opposed to focusing on those in the skilled trades. While the American Federation of Labor had included some industrial unions, the craft unionists were the dominant force in the organization. The Great Depression had hit industrial workers and their unions hard. Leaders from the heavily affected unions pressed for more support from the AFL. In response, the AFL did authorize organizing drives in the automobile, rubber, and steel industries, but they gave little financial support or effective leadership to those unions. Matters came to a head at the AFL's 1935 convention when mine workers president John L. Lewis punched the president of the Carpenters Union. Afterwards, Lewis called together various industrial union leaders, including Sidney Hillman, head of the Amalgamated Clothing Workers, and Harvey Fremming of the Oil Workers Union, to discuss the creation of the CIO. In its statement of purpose, the CIO declared its aim to encourage the AFL to organize by industry. However, the AFL's leadership was not sympathetic to what they saw as an internal rivalry. In 1936, the AFL suspended all of the CIO unions. This led to the industrial union's breakaway from the AFL to form a rival federation. The CIO changed its name to the Congress of Industrial Organizations. By 1938, the CIO had amassed 3 million members. The CIO ran successful organizing drives in auto, mining, meatpacking, and steel. The two union organizations finally remerged in 1955, forming what is known today as the AFL-CIO.
From Seoul, South Korea, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. $250 million in economic deals were announced during President Trump's state visit to China on Thursday. Here was Chinese President Xi Jinping through a translator.
Just now, the President and I witnessed the signing of some major cooperation agreements by our businesses.
This is the way that China operates.
Alan Wheatley is an associate fellow for global economics at the London think tank Chatham House.
They group together lots of deals that are in the works. They bundle them all together into one big headline number that is going to impress the visitor.
The most consequential of Thursday's deals was a $43 billion announcement by 3 Chinese energy firms to purchase liquefied natural gas, or LNG, from a yet-to-be-built production site in Alaska. Eager to announce a deal, energy-hungry China and energy-rich America proved a good match, explains Carrie Ann Shanks, head of Asia Gas for the energy analysis firm Wood Mackenzie.
US exports are rising very fast and China's imports are rising very fast. So naturally, LNG trade between the two nations will increase over time.
Even better, construction of the Alaska LNG project would be both labor-intensive, meaning Trump could tout major job creation, as well as requiring long-term contracts to keep operational. That means revenues could stretch out for years. But for all the hype over the Alaska project, Shanks says China values flexibility in its dealings and could buy gas from any number of countries. And that means the quote-unquote deals announced Thursday are far from final.
We definitely think there's a slice of the cake to be had for US LNG exporters, but it might be a quite small slice of the very big cake.
Luke Vargas in Seoul, South Korea.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
Fascist, you may be surprised. People all over this world are getting organized to fight you fascists abide.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. So Helen sent me an email during the break. She says, I've contacted numerous people who cannot understand why ordinary working people who happen to be Democrats had the election stolen from them because the party allowed the cross-filing BS to continue. And look, it's one of the things about Pennsylvania that drives me absolutely insane. In this state, and I grew up in Ohio, and we first started voting in Ohio, and I don't remember seeing it there. I don't believe it's the law there. But here in Pennsylvania, you can cross-file and, be on both ballots. And, it's, some people say, well, it's like having an open primary or an open election. People get to vote for who they want. No. It's in this state, if you're a registered Democrat, there should be something to that. There should be some honesty. And this here in this state, you can be on both a Democrat and a Republican. And look, the name right behind it says Democrat and Republican. And I don't vote for anyone who cross-files. I never have. I'll write in Mickey Mouse or, Thor or I'll write somebody in. I will not vote for someone who cross-files. And as Helen points out, Judge Lori Serratelli lost a re-election bid because all of the Republicans cross-filed. And you got a number of Democrats going, oh, okay, let's go vote for this person because their name was higher. And as she points out, most people are not as astute about politics as me or you. And they do not have the time to remember about pulling the Democratic lever because of a bunch of Coke John Birchers cross-filing. She asked the question, how do we stop it? How do we stop this? And I go, you got to stop it through the legislature, much like what Michael Pollack was talking about. And I got to wonder if this was part of that, if this is part of the 20 bills that he's talking about that we need to be putting into place to make our ballots matter. Look, in this state is such a badly gerrymandered district that most places aren't even worth voting for outside of the primaries. Once the primaries are decided, you can pretty much bet that the dominant party is going to win. All because of the way they draw the maps. I live in a district that's 65-35. For a Democrat to win, lightning has to strike. The seas have to open. There has to be some cataclysmic. Look, they say your opponent could get caught with a dead hooker or a live boy. In this district, you could probably get caught with a dead hooker and a live boy and still get elected. That's how screwed up it is. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any of today's program, ricksmithshow.com. That's where you get the podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. We will see you back here. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.